So happy to welcome Dr. Urban Kiernan today on the podcast. I've been very much anticipating this conversation because I know that everyone is going to get a lot out of it. And we are going to talk a lot about cholesterol and lipid panels and how that relates to metabolic health. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. So I'm really excited to bring Urban on to kind of debunk some of the information that we've been taught. And really, it's been a good 70 years of trying to turn the ship and bring the correct information, correct nutritional information, especially. So I'm so excited to have you here. If you could start with just telling us a little bit about who you are and how you got into the space where you are today and how you're so interested in this topic.
Oh, thanks, Shana. I really appreciate the opportunity to engage your audience and just share a little bit of, just some tidbits of stuff that goes on inside my melon here in terms of stuff. So again, formally, Dr. Urban A. Kiernan, PhD. But by all means, for the course of this conversation, call me Urban. It's we can keep formalities to a minimum. Graduate of Arizona State University. Call the Phoenix metropolitan area my home. I'm also the founder and innovator in the drug discovery and development space. So even though I'm hypercritical of my space, I am directly immersed into the pharmaceutical world, and I see and understand the value that we have to be a player in the game when it comes to the long-term management of human health. With that long-standing career, graduated with my PhD in 2002, started off in the biomarker and diagnostic space, really started my career off with a bang, made a tremendous amount of discoveries. Was funded by the NIH through the National Institutes of Diabetes, digestive, and kidney disease. That's a mouthful. Try to say that 5 times. But nonetheless, that was to study biomarkers of pre and type 2 diabetes. And that was a really interesting introduction into the metabolic world, because as a part of that research, we went from discovery all to the point of technology licensing with Johnson & Johnson. So it was very much a very successful program. It really opened my eyes when it came to, even though we were studying type 2 diabetes and pre-diabetes, the way it was defined back in like 2007, it has evolved since then. And for the record, science is continuously evolving, and ergo, part of the issue is that there's a lot of the clinical world that just does not, or is unable to keep up with this evolution of information. So, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. The interesting thing that I got from those experiments in that process was the amount of interconnectivity between loss of glycemic control and your lipid profiles, and very specific aspects of lipid profiles. And it's actually, you could see a preceding entryway into what we define as pre and type 2 diabetes from this type of lipid profiling before your OGTT, loss of glycemic control, and A1C. This is actually even before HbA1c was a formal diagnostic for type 2 diabetes. That's how old I am. That's a part of my career. But long story short, developed that career out, very, very successful. However, though, in the middle of all of that, there was a personal tragedy. My first wife died of cancer. And, really sitting down and like going through that process and sitting through hospitals rooms, it really come to Jesus moment, so to speak, regarding what is the value of diagnostics and biomarkers. I'm a firm believer that more information the better, but unless it makes a decision, it could be just a useless data point. And I kind of felt at that point in time, man, I'm kind of like wasting my life here, because even though I've had all this success, it almost be like it's a evolutionary dead end. And so that drove me into the pharmaceutical space. And so, my career evolved, and eventually, I stepped away from a pretty high profile career in a Fortune 500 company, just simply because the job was killing me. I got caught in that corporate trap, which so many of us Americans wind up in which my personal health started to suffer. I was traveling all the time, eating in airports. Sleep schedule was horrible because I had a global role, and literally I became so metabolically sick. I was on my last leg, but didn't realize, because you are the job, you're a workhorse, you do all of this stuff, just keep on pushing and keep on working towards that American dream, when on the inside you are just so sick and tired. And I just had my breaking point. I left that position in 2016, gave myself an entire year to kind of like revamp myself. And if you saw pictures of me then versus pictures of me now, you might not even be able to recognize me. I'm physically such a different looking individual because I took it upon myself to correct my behaviors. And again, I'm in the pharmaceutical space. I develop drugs for a living. Even though I own my own drug company, my promise to myself and my family is I'm never going to be a customer. And so I take my personal health extremely seriously, and that's something as a part of my Decoding Health podcast I try to promote to people, is give you guys real information so that you can make the best decisions for yourself. I'm not going to tell anybody what to do, unless your last name is Kiernan and you're under the age of 18. I've got zero say in what you say or do. So, with that said, in 2017 or 2018, realistically, I founded iMetabolic Biopharma, which is a therapeutic company in which I started to go and take all of these thoughts around innovation, putting them into practice, and then here we sit now in 2025 with early stage candidates that are moving into preclinical trials. So it's this whole evolution of myself, evolution of the science, being able to go and develop innovation in areas which, to be honest with you, are just grossly looked over by Western medicine. And just for a descriptor regarding IMBP, we have a pipeline of drugs. We are developing therapeutics in the metabolic, cardiovascular, and neurodegenerative, more specifically Alzheimer's disease space. And there is this common underlying factor between all three of the specifics that we're looking at, and it comes down to fat metabolism. Ergo, all of my stuff that I started to experience back in like 2007-ish, 2008-ish, when I was funded by the NIDDK, and it was just like, wow, that's really interesting. That's not what I had expected. And just with that continuation of thought, and now the addition of more science on top of that, my view and perspective has become, this might be biased, absolutely crystal clear regarding where the confusion and deficiencies are in the current system that is not in alignment with what I'm seeing in the research space. And the average everyday person needs to understand what we see in the research world before it gets to the clinic, where an MD stethoscope, white jacket comes in with your chart to talk to you. It's at least a decade before that information gets there. And so, back to your preface of this conversation regarding, everybody being, misled. I wouldn't use that level of sinister terms. I think the clinical world is doing the best that they can with the tools and the knowledge base that they're allowed to operate in. And my wife is in the clinical space, and so I'm very I'm very aware of the rules and regulations, the box that they have to operate in because they are licensed professionals. And you cannot jeopardize that license because you've got all the school debt, the whole 9 yards. You need a career. We all have to turn around and make money at the end of the day, but they have to operate within a specific set of guidelines. Now, I'm afforded the opportunity. I see what's going on in the clinical space, and I can flat out sit there and say, those numbers don't make sense. That doesn't seem right. If the problem was cholesterol, with all of the cholesterol lowering medications that we have, with fat-free foods that we have, why is this situation getting worse? Just fundamental first base principles type questions. Now I jump over here to my research hat and I see everything that's going on. Okay, I see where the misfire is. Your two ships passing in the night, to go and say it romantically. It's no fault of anything. It's the way it is. What are the tools that are necessary in Western medicine in order to bridge this gap? And the way the system is set up now, and to be honest with you, will still be into the foreseeable future, is you need a therapeutic option that will be able to go and unequivocally bridge that gap between this clinical deficiency as an enabling tool that's out there. So that's, sorry for being so long-winded right there, but that's basically where, I sit in this entire space.
No, that's very interesting because I'm sure as you were going through your introduction, my listeners are probably like, why does she have this guy from a pharmaceutical company, on? I thought she's like, her whole mission was to try to get people off medications, which it is, but I think we all like kind of misunderstand each other. And that's why I wanted to bring you on, because you said like there's a lot of bridging of gaps that need to happen. And I've heard also that, the time from clinical research to the time that it trickles down to the doctors, anywhere from like, or professional or any kind of practitioners, anywhere from like 7 to 14 years. And you said it's about a decade. And so why do you think that is? Like, what you said that there's some forces going on, and you're kind of working to bridge that. But why do you think it takes so long from the time that we like, is it just like there's so much research out there? Like some things are pushed, agendas are pushed before others, or why the 10 years before we know what's really happening? And then it's like, by then it's like, there's new stuff on the horizon as well. So it's just like this continuous cycle of not ever really getting the most present day research into the eyes of the patient.
So now I'm going to answer your question. Nobody listening take this on the sinister angle that you can flip this over to. Like, I'm just being honest and transparent. Doesn't make things right, wrong, just keep it as indifferent. Okay, so we mentioned HbA1c. That was a biomarker in regular use for literally 20 years before it was adopted as a diagnostic biomarker. I literally remember VPs from Johnson & Johnson asking me my opinion on it as a diagnostic biomarker, and my comment then, which still holds true now, is it's actually crap as a diagnostic biomarker. It's good for disease management, in my professional opinion, from long-term glycemic control, because it gives you an average over a 3-month period of how your blood sugar has been managed. But from a diagnostic perspective, it's crap. So why did So why did it take, if it was going to become a diagnostic, why did it take 20 years to get there? Well, that took that long just simply because since there is really no money to be made in HbA1c testing, you need to substantiate it with just volumes and volumes of data. And that takes time. And so it's one of those things that was just used so often for monitoring long-term glycemic control, they just basically threw that on as a gimme. Things will move forward, and that's, from discovery to actual clinical implementation. The fastest I've ever seen something come through is with brain natriuretic peptide. That took 9 years. And that's simply because there is financial gain around that. And so, again, there's one, you need data, and the amount of volumes of data that's required is going to be driven by different factors. But then you also have the layer of regulatory that has to go on top of that. That takes time. That's also data driven. So you need to make sure that you have enough data in order to get the regulators to approve it. And then you also have the payor system. And this is where here things get really, really morass, because you have to convince the payors, whether it be private pay or through insurance, insurance policies, that this is money well worth spent. And once you get those things in alignment, then you can go and start educating the clinicians to be able to write the scripts, check off the box, here's a new test, here's a new pharmaceutical that's out there. But again, all of this stuff takes an extreme amount of time and even a larger amount of money, depending upon the nature of the disease that this particular innovation is supposed to turn around and help. And just to kind of clarify that, if we're going after some very rare, orphan indication, where it's a very, very small population that has this, it's actually, you can get by with developing a therapeutic for that group much easier and much faster with a lower cost, just simply because they're viewed as an underrepresented group. Whereas if you're trying to go after something from like cardiovascular disease, okay, which is a huge issue, those clinical trials are absolutely ginormous, take forever, and so that the cost associated with those is so much higher. So there's so much ebb and flow and balance that's required, that there's so much complexity that goes behind the very question that you asked, that I would like to see the American population cut pharmaceutical companies a little bit of slack, just simply because the amount of expense that it takes in order to get to product. Like, I just wrote a commercialization plan for one of our products. Again, it's an orphan indication, so a very, very small group, so it's totally streamlined. What we're looking at is a 9-year program, as a part of this. Estimated cost to get to market is between $70 and $90 million. Okay, to get through this. Again, it's the fast track, the streamlined process. So I operate a business. We need to be able to go and make that $90 million back and start to turn around a profit. This isn't a charity. We're all into making money. And you need to, there are risks that are taken as a part of this from both the company as well as from the investor standpoint. All of these things, all of these checks and balances need to even out at the end of the day. So, sorry for being so long-winded there, but there's so many moving parts to that the average everyday person, and no disrespect to them, why should you know the way the system works? Actually, it is kind of prudent for people to have a level of understanding the way the system works. just to go and, okay, not necessarily the bad guy. Don't get me wrong. There's things that big pharma have done that have just been. Are we allowed to cuss on your show? Don't.
We generally don't.
Okay, not a problem. Just
I have a lot of
very.
moms and kids listening or
Don't get me
having in
wrong.
the car.
So just
For us.
very, very believy, some of the things that some of my colleague companies have done. It's just like, no,
Yeah.
I cannot endorse that whatsoever. But yeah, so don't get me wrong, that is very much out there. But that's in every industry that's out there.
Yeah, that's why I like to hear both angles because we're so quick to say, oh, these pharmaceutical companies are so money hungry and all they care about is money. And, yeah, we got, you have to keep your company thriving. But at the end of the day, it is very, very, my husband used to work in pharmaceuticals long time ago, and it's very costly, the trials and getting everything to market, the patents, I mean, it's wild. Um, So I mean, I don't know real extensively what all goes on behind the scene, but it's a lot more than we think it is, I'm sure. So I'd love to talk. I know you're very knowledgeable about lipids and cholesterol and how that relates to metabolic health, but can we look at like the standard lipid panel? So for the most part, people are getting a total cholesterol, an LDL, and HDL, triglycerides, probably a glucose. Hopefully fasting insulin will be in there
Yeah.
sometime soon. But out of those actual markers, like what do you think is important to look at in terms of metabolic health? Like what I've been kind of focusing on when people only have those bare bone panels, because that's what their practitioners are typically ordering for them. And if they go above and beyond that, it's either hard to get the testing or it's not covered by their insurance or whatever it is. And it is getting easier, in my opinion. There's a lot of places you can go online to order your own labs. But I know I'm kind of honing in on that triglyceride to HDL ratio. But what are your thoughts? I mean, because a lot of people don't even look at like particle size or the ApoB or any of the more extensive panels. But as in terms of metabolic health, if people have that in front of them, like what should they be looking at?
So I personally begin with triglycerides,
Yep.
your TGs, and just so your audience members, if they don't know, they'll know that you only get triglycerides from dietary fats. Okay, then it winds up either being used for energy, some of it's used for hormones, a lot of it does go into storage, excuse me, depending upon what your energy expenditures and how much carb that you wind up being as a part of your diet. From a research perspective, your fasting triglyceride level is unequivocally associated with your metabolic health and your risk of a negative cardiovascular event taking place. That is far more predictive than anything with the cholesterol. Now, you like your triglyceride versus HDL. And I know there's a lot of people that do that. The issue that I have with the HDL is the way we currently look at the lipid panels and understand HDL. This is something that's very, very common in medicine, and especially in the pharmaceutical space. And hopefully everybody will relate to this. It's like when you give one dose of something and you get a positive response, people are like, oh, let's take a little bit more. And you get a higher dose, you get more of a positive response, and it keeps on going up and up. And then you wind up with this inverse curve. Eventually, you get to a point where you no longer get any benefit. In fact, it actually turns against you and becomes detrimental. So it's not like it's a plateauing that occurs. It turns into an inverse curve. It becomes a kind of skewed J or a fish hook, and you wind up taking nosedive. That's actually true on a conventional Western diet, that if your HDL gets too high, it's not necessarily it's a good thing. And so there is this thing as of right now that HDL can be too high, and typically the cutoff is around 80 milligrams per deciliter. If it's above that, if you're into the hundreds, like by conventional Western medicine, there's a lot of a lot of thinking that goes like
Yeah.
it shouldn't be that high by conventional thinking. Now, I'm kind of speaking of both sides of my mouth, but it's one of those things where when it comes to the actual HDL, we know a lot, but we're only scratching the surface. And what I'm going to bring up right now is there's a new area of research and thought regarding, it's called dysfunctional HDL. Everybody views HDL as your quote unquote good cholesterol, which, I'll kind of jump into the good and bad aspect into a little bit. But just because you have HDL that's there, or non-ApoB containing cholesterol, that's what they call it, it doesn't mean it's doing a job. In fact, if the environmental conditions within the human body are correct, and correct in a negative way, like meaning high inflammatory state, your HDL can become the inverse of what you would expect. Okay, it actually becomes pro-inflammatory. It becomes pro-atherogenic. So everything that you think HDL is supposed to provide, it goes 100% against it. And this is a new, very interesting area of research. They do believe that this is potentially contributory to Alzheimer's disease. And this is something of very much of interest that me and my company, we're going after from a therapeutic option, just simply because there is this growing body of evidence that this is extremely real, but Western medicine is totally ignorant towards it. The only reason why I went to that whole diatribe right there, Shannon, was simply because you're using your HDL number as your denominator.
Yeah.
That might actually skew things.
Okay.
Depending upon what that number is, just simply because that HDL quantitative level, it is kind of a gray area. And so I do pull that into question. But from a triglyceride standpoint, if you're over 100 milligrams per deciliter, my personal recommendation to somebody, you might want to go and look at trying to go and bring that down, if you can, So.
Yeah, and I always encourage less than 100. I know I think most standard medical labs will say will flag you over 150. My triglycerides are like in the 50s, so they're at a very healthy amount. But it's interesting about the HDL because it's like it's been coined as the good cholesterol for as long as I've been practicing, and the LDL is the bad. And I think that's really simplistic. And very rarely do you see the HDL above 80, but you do have to wonder if if that's being pushed up and up and up, and the total is being pushed up and up and up, are there negative consequences to that as well? So triglycerides, so let's break it down a little bit more. So you said like over or under 100 is optimal. What's pushing the triglycerides up? We've talked about this a little bit on the podcast, and yeah, and I mean, I just like to keep it really simple for people. I'm like, those are basically fats circulating in the bloodstream. But what is pushing that up, and how are those high triglycerides relating to insulin resistance and poor metabolic health? Because I feel like people just get really tripped up on this, and fatty liver is another thing that is just exploding, and it's exploding with children. Like I can't tell you how many families I've had that have come to me because their children have high triglycerides, which is really, really sad. And usually I can point to sugary drinks as a main culprit, but what's happening with those triglycerides going up? Why do they go up, and how does that connect to insulin resistance?
And so you touched on a lot of points there, Shannon, are absolutely integral as a part of a singular conversation. And, since you and I are like the same age, which I won't disclose to the audience members, when we were in college, NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is
Yes.
NAFLD, metabolically associated fatty liver disease, wasn't even a disease.
No, it was so rare. The only time I saw fatty liver was in alcoholics when I was
Yes.
graduating college. Yeah.
And that's why they had to come up with that definition that it's non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And that leads into NASH, non-alcoholic steatotic hepatitis, which your only chance of survival is a liver transplant. But, we'll leave that for a different conversation. But now MAFLD is in some demographics, it's 60% of that population. Here in the state of Arizona, the youngest diagnosed case of MAFLD that I saw was 8 years old. Again, you turn the clock back to when I was a younger man, wasn't even a disease, and then um, it's something that would be, oh, this wouldn't be a pediatric condition. Because at one point in time, type 2 diabetes was taught in medical school. Children can't get type 2 diabetes.
Right.
Adult onset diabetes.
Right.
All of the nomenclature has changed around this, in which you have prepubescent, prepubescent children having these diseases that are defined for people who are chronically ill. How can you be chronically ill and you haven't been alive for a decade? It's just like, by convention, everybody talks about it, and you're friends with Shannon and Michelle. They talk about it all the time. By the time you become type 2 diabetic, you've been sick for at least a decade. Okay, that's great. How do what is the mechanism then in somebody who's 7, 8 years old, who's being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes? They haven't been alive for that long. It's just like, what is that environmental and genetic situation truly comprised of in order for that level of disease manifestation in such a short period of time? So, you kind of mentioned, like, jokingly, sugary drinks. That's absolutely, part of the issue. And, I'm going to go and, throw it out there, like, to, Gatorade and Coca-Cola, being marketed as a healthy drink to children when it's one of the worst things, for them. So let's kind of step back to, like, your original question regarding this whole insulin resistance and, like, your lipid profiles, like, and this is the interesting thing, is those camps have become so tribal. Like, even platforms like LinkedIn, it's just basically, in type shouting matches back and forth, because never the two shall meet. And it's just like, you guys are just, both sides, you guys are so obtuse to the issue. One of the benefits that I have because of my career course, I am beholden to no one. I am not from either of these worlds. I just kind of stumbled into it with a fresh pair of eyes and was able to be like, wow, that's really interesting. Actually, kind of cool. Never thought of that. I don't think anybody's ever thought of that. Wow. Now we got a patent on it, just because nobody else has seen that before, and nobody else ever, thought of that. And so there is this huge intertwining between insulin resistance and lipid metabolism that, from a mechanistic standpoint, is much more interactive and reliant on each other than the way conventional medicine actually gives it credit for, or is able. Actually, I'm going to even take a step back. It's more intertwined than what conventional medicine can comprehend, because there's no appropriate way for them to test for it. More importantly, there's no way for them to treat it.
Right.
Okay.
You
at
hit
a
the nail on the head.
yeah, so again, they're limited by the tools that they have. And again, I don't blame them. But what happens is you wind up with these groups, these tribal groups who are siloed. You got cardiovascular lipids, endocrinology, um, insulin resistance. What came first, the chicken or the egg? And you got these highly educated people. I'm never going to turn around and um, criticize somebody's credentials. You know, if you're published out there in the whole 9 yards, I'm going to take it on face value that what you put out there was quality and with a high level of ethics. However, though, they're so siloed, and science as a whole is just plagued by this, and I've talked about it on my show before, is that it operates with blinders on. Okay, and it's simply because, and I'm going to use an example like in the drug space, like clinical trials. In order to get approved, you have to go through your clinical trials. Well, the FDA doesn't set up your clinical trial protocol. That's done by you as the drug sponsor. So I get to define what is success. And then ultimately, by default on that, I get to define what is failure. And I can set those tolerances up however tight or loose that it is. And so I draw this box, I put all of these little check boxes in there, and then as we go through, check, 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 check. The FDA has signed off beforehand that if you meet all of these checks, we're going to give you regulatory approval. And so you're playing this game in which we are only answering the questions that are in that box. The biggest offender of this that I'm seeing right now are the GLP-1 receptor agonists and all of the craziness that's going on with those two. Simply because when those went through clinical trials, they had a box of questions that they went through and simply checked off. And they checked off those boxes very, very well, with blinders on, without any type of consideration regarding all of these secondary, tertiary, quaternary interactions that take place. And again, I hope I'm not getting too sciencey with people, but I'm young enough to remember that smoking was once allowed on airplanes.
Oh, me too. And in
Yeah,
restaurants. I used to
yeah.
waitress and I hated being in the smoking section. Yeah.
I remember like traveling as a kid and my mom always being, oh, for the airplane, make sure we're in the non-smoking section. And even as a little kid, I'm thinking to myself, that's the dumbest thing. We're in a
Like
tube.
2 aisles away from the
It's not like they're circulating different air or anything like that.
right.
You're in a tube. And that's the way I view the human body. It is a closed container. You cannot influence one thing and have it only influence that particular, again, the blinders, only that particular pathway without influencing anything else. That's just scientifically naive, in my point. I understand why it's done, because I live in the world in which there's such a thing as too much information. Okay, I get it, respect that to a degree, but nonetheless, you have to be aware of, oh, there are these unintended consequences, homeostasis balancing out, okay? And this has happened so long in the research area around cardiovascular disease and insulin resistance that people have just neglected the influence of the opposing side.
Yeah.
Case in point, I'm still not done with my analysis on the paper. I'm going to be doing an episode on it. There's this new publication that just came out in July in nutrition physiology, which is getting so much press right now because of its association with saturated fat and the development of atherosclerosis and
Okay.
cardiovascular disease. In their control groups, what they were feeding the test populations were pizza and milkshakes, only focusing on the associations made from the saturated fats that are in that meal consumption. Well, what about everything else? Like, what about the sugar? What about, so again, it's back to this concept of everybody being tribal and the blinders on. So long story short, without getting into the whole mechanistics of that, is the consumption of sugar and the raising of insulin directly influences the rate of triglyceride metabolism in your bloodstream. It actually is the controller of that process. Now, if you have a high carb, high sugar, thus a high insulin type diet and thus lifestyle, your body's ability to appropriately process dietary triglycerides becomes neutered, okay? And so this is where you end up with the development of these, you'll hear the term TRLs, triglyceride-rich lipoproteins, which are highly atherogenic, will lead to all the way down to small, dense LDLs, because simply the mechanisms around this lipoprotein particle life cycle has fundamentally broken down. And I was very specific with my language there. I said lipoprotein particles. You guys will know them as your LDL, okay? But everything goes and throws that little C at the end, your LDL cholesterol, with the emphasis on the cholesterol. Where I sit in the world, to be honest with you, I don't give a darn regarding that C portion of it. I'm interested in the particle aspect. More importantly, the functionality, and is it able to complete its life cycle journey so that it is in complete balance. It's just like, oh, I get up in the morning, I leave home, I go to work, and at the end of the day, I complete the cycle by going home again. If you didn't come home, people at home would start to work. Like, were you abducted? Did you get in a car accident? Are you having an affair? Like, you know, what exactly is the situation? You're supposed to be coming home. And that is a part of the issue. I like to go and refer to these abnormal or dysfunctional lipoprotein particles as delinquent teenagers out at 2 a.m. Nothing good is going to come out of that.
Yes, that's what I tell my boys when they buck me about coming home at midnight. Like, nothing happens good after midnight.
Yes. No, and that's a wonderful analogy. It's just, you're supposed to come home, reset, and then start on the next trip.
So how do we know that our cycles are good and complete? Like, what should we be looking at?
So unfortunately, that's a part of the issue in medicine, is just we don't know, just simply because and again, there's a lot of moving parts. From a payor system, just simply getting an ApoB test, there's a lot of insurance companies that will not cover that. They might cover it once as a quote diagnostic, but even with that said, because I've had mine done before.
Yeah, me too.
Most clinicians don't even know how to interpret that information.
Right.
Because all they do, it just becomes another surrogate for your cholesterol number.
Yeah.
And there's no distinction regarding the two. If I were doing it, and again, you know, this isn't like, this is just if me looking at my own data, and if somebody wanted to turn around and go and replicate this too, that's totally up to them. Is what you want to look for would be a small, so if you have a high cholesterol number and a low ApoB number, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Because what that points to is you have a small number of particles, but a lot of cholesterol there. Okay, so that means these things are big.
Yeah.
If you have a low cholesterol number, okay, even normal, but you have a high ApoB number, that is the worst possible scenario you can look at, because what that means is, from a cholesterol standpoint, you have a lot of particles, because you only have, again, they give your ApoB in milligrams per deciliter. The point with that you need to understand with that is, for every LDL particle, there's only one ApoB molecule. Okay, so if you have a high ApoB number and a low cholesterol, that means you have a lot of ApoB, a small amount of cholesterol. That means those particles are very, very small. And those are highly atherogenic, because they're able to go and burrow into your endothelium. And that's where the issue remains. Here's the thing, and this is the example that I always use. You've driven on a freeway before.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you were just kind of like cruising along and you saw like a bus with 80 people on it, would you get nervous at all?
Not if the driver was safe. Yeah.
Okay, but nonetheless, so think about a person being cholesterol. So you got 80 cholesterol on this bus. If 80 crotch rockets came up and surrounded you, would you get nervous?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. It's still 80. It's still the same amount of cholesterol, but it's just in a different type of vehicle. And so that's what people need to understand. Are you looking at a bus, big, large, buoyant, or are you looking at these small ones? Because it's these small ones that the accidents can occur around. And so, you know, people, again, Western medicine doesn't include this as a part of their equation. You can make inferences about this if you have the correct data, so that you can make the appropriate decisions for yourself. The only reason why I bring this up is, normally I like live a ketogenic type lifestyle. And to be expected, your lipid profiles by Western standpoint just go completely and totally, like, you know, out the window. And conventional doctors have no idea of how to even begin to deal with those numbers. However, though, I'm not, have the conversation with your physician. If you see that, it might go right over their head. And that's completely and totally fine. But, you know, just using that little technique that I just said right there.
Yeah.
And then so looking at your triglycerides. Because if your cholesterol gets out of whack, but then if your cholesterol gets out of whack, but your triglycerides are normal, to be honest with you, and then your insulin, your HOMO-IR are all in whack, to be honest with you, I think you're pretty good. You know, everybody needs to understand that from a heart attack perspective, 50% of people who have a heart attack have normal cholesterol levels. You know, that's scientific fact.
Or low, like some have very low cholesterol also.
Yeah, and so again, back to my fundamental question, you know, back to the medical arena, is if we unequivocally know what the answer is, and we're able to deal with it, we're just going to go and throw a statin on you, then why is it a coin toss? To me, it should be like at least skewed in the right direction, at least a little bit. You know, why is it still 1 in 4 deaths here in the United States and the Western world is from cardiovascular disease? That needle is not moved at all.
Right. Especially for women. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah. So me as a perimenopausal woman, you know, I've seen my cholesterol increase in the last couple of years, but my triglycerides stayed low. My fasting insulin actually went lower. But like you said, like we get our lipid panel done, especially women my age, and their cholesterol goes up, and the practitioner is, well, let's put you on a statin. So in that circumstance, it's most important to just look at the triglyceride, or look at keying on the triglycerides, keying on maybe the fasting insulin, glucose, make sure that those are normal. What's happening with that bump up in cholesterol, and are there any like tools, or I suppose you could, you know, load yourself with studies or some kind of literature when you're getting, because I've had so many people just say, I don't want to go on a statin, Shana. My, you know, it's been 2 years that my doctor keeps asking me to go on a statin because my cholesterol is like 240. You know, it's not even like it's by my standards, that's not real high.
That's not very high by my standards, to be honest with you. You know, so So that's a very loaded question.
They all are, aren't they?
So, but what you need to do is you need to make sure that when you're being treated by a physician, that you're being treated by the appropriate type of physician. And it's just like when you go through grade school, a first grade teacher should not be teaching 12th graders.
Yeah.
It's a totally different demographic. When you're in your 20s and 30s, it's a very, very different type of medicine than when you're perimenopausal and menopausal. And you need somebody who is highly educated, highly specific in that area. Now, one of the things that I would almost guarantee, if they are truly skilled in that art, they're going to start looking at your thyroid and thyroid function. And it's more than just your thyroxine and your T3 and
PTO,
T4.
yeah.
They should be looking at a reverse T3 and understanding how to interpret that data. Now, there's some great, clinicians that are out there who really have a firm grip on all of that to help get those numbers, maybe not by Western medicine perfect, but lower. So if you're creating this added level of anxiety because everybody says, this is bad and I'm feeling bad about this, it will help turn around and suppress that 240. Maybe you'll get down to 200, but that's one of those areas though where by conventional medicine, they're going to say statin. Okay. The data is clear though, when you are on statins suppress GLP-1 expression. It results in the development of type 2 diabetes, results in the development of Alzheimer's disease and neurodegenerative. That's all becoming very, very crystal clear in the research space because Western medicine caught up to it. Now I'll see you probably in 2035 when everybody knows that, but that's not going to help us or your client group, at this point in time. So, long story short is maybe you need to find a different medical practitioner who's
Yeah.
able to turn around and guide you through this phase of your life better. Again, we're all aging. Our mechanics, they're all changing. Even simple functionality in the gym, like I tell somebody, of my male peers, they get to 40 and they went to the gym and they're like, oh, my shoulders are so sore. And it's like, did you do military press? And they're like, yeah. Stop. Once you hit 40, our shoulders are not meant to be out like this anymore. Start bringing everything in. It's just the natural wear and tear on things. Make them on.
Yeah.
Make an adjustment on this. But again, it's just one of those things where, unfortunately, with conventional medicine, they have to go off that recipe book. And in defense of the clinicians, in order for them to get reimbursed from the payor system, they have to offer you the statin.
Yeah.
We still have the right here in the United States of America, advocacy for ourselves, that you can say no. But your prescriber has to say, this is what I'm recommending.
Yeah.
And then they have to put in there, the patient is denying this.
Yeah.
Else they will not get paid.
Non-compliant.
Oh, yeah,
Red flag, red flag. Yeah, and now you're seeing statins are so popular, prescribed statins, like you said, it decreases GLP-1 activity. And now we see this huge boom of GLP-1 antagonists. So while we have you here, what are your thoughts? I know that could be a whole hour-long discussion. But what are your thoughts on the GLP-1? Do you have anything in the pipeline in your company? And then we can talk about the natural supplement or the nutraceutical that you and I are so fond of.
So with the GLP-1 receptor agonist, I understand the premise. And again, I was in the type 2 diabetes space before there were the GLP-1 receptor agonists. And actually, I did some research in part of a collaboration with a big pharma company in which we were trying to actually study endogenous GLP-1. And that was, again, a very insightful and educational process, considering it resulted in a lot of null data, just simply because GLP-1 as a hormone is not able to be directly replicated as a therapeutic. So people need to understand GLP-1 receptor agonists don't actually have GLP-1 in them.
Yes.
People need to understand it. The emphasis needs to be on the part that is normally cut out. People just normally call them GLP-1s. No, it's the receptor agonist.
Agonist, yeah.
It's the equivalent to aspartame, which we know how horrible that is. There's no sugar there, but it tricks your taste buds into thinking something's sweet there. All you're doing is you're tricking those receptors into thinking GLP-1 is there. In fact, tirzepatide, the molecule, and lagutide, which is like the predecessor to that, that's all predicated off of exidin-4, which is an isolate out of Gila monster saliva. You know, it's biological trickery. Now, with what I'm doing within my company, nothing related into that space. However, watching that space very, very closely. Again, it has its place. I'm not going to go and chastise that, but the way I view all pharmaceuticals, it is a crutch. It is not a life fit. It should not be a death sentence unless extenuating circumstances required, some sort of genetic aspect. Okay, fine. You know, that's a different scenario. Quick analogy, I tore my ACL. So for a period of time after my ACL repair, I was on crutches. If I turned around and told everybody that I didn't want to go to physical therapy, I'm totally fine just being on crutches for the rest of my life, what would people think? Everybody would be like, you are absolutely insane. Okay, I view this as no different. Okay, here you have an opportunity, a crutch, to be able to, as an example, say there's an individual who weighs 400 pounds and they are having mobility issues. Maybe utilize the drugs, the Wegovy or the Zepbound, in order to shed that weight so that you can start ambulating and start exercising and reclaiming your life. It's not this continual race to sit there and every single week see how my number on my scale is dropping, okay? That is a misappropriation of use when it comes to those drugs in both my professional and personal opinion. So again, they have their place, but what I always tell people is if you have a plan to go on, you better have a plan to get off of them too. Okay, so again, very, very simple concept. Biggest issue right now, especially with all of the cheap compounded versions that are out there, and I don't even understand from a legal standpoint, from a intellectual property standpoint, how these are even still available. But that's
yeah, I know it's being like cracked down on for sure.
Yeah, well, because somebody else owns that. I already told you how much the cost is to develop
Yeah.
the drug. Now you got somebody ripping you off.
Yep.
Any of your audience members, if you develop something that you own, that you have exclusive rights to, and since somebody is ripping you off,
Yep.
I think it would upset you too. Like, I understand the whole cost and stuff like that, and that's a different discussion. But nonetheless, those drugs are being just thrown out there like as candy. It's like they're everywhere and they're being used inappropriately. And we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the negative aspect of this. There's a $2 billion lawsuit that just kind of came out, regarding these. And again, this is just the beginning with these current level of drugs. One of the biggest areas on this is the sarcopenia. Up to 50% of the weight loss is from muscle wasting. One of the things that Western medicine as a whole really does not give enough credit to is the metabolic and hormonal value that muscle plays in the human body. And when that is wasting away, and unfortunately the rebound when you go off of these drugs, if you had not making the appropriate lifestyle changes, you are worse off than where you started. and nobody's talking about that. Now you've got all the issues with, the gallbladder, gastric paralysis, blindness now. It's more and more is coming to light, and there's even some physicians that are out there who are predicting that this is going to be the way they're being used right now. This is going to be a backfire in one of the biggest mistakes in medical history. I understand there's a lot of money to be made on this. I get it. A part of me actually respects it, but you still have an obligation, if you took that Hippocratic oath, to help people, to operate at the level. Because that's the only way you can get this, is through a prescription. These are prescribed drugs. That means it has to come from somebody who is educated and licensed on this. They have to act in a responsible fashion. And if you don't meet the criteria to receive this drug, then you say no. You don't meet the criteria to receive this drug. That it is what it is. Like, I don't care that you have a wedding that's coming up and you want to shed 10 pounds. Go to the gym.
Well, and it's like, as a practitioner, you can understand, because people are desperate. They want to lose weight. They don't want to be 300 pounds. And the lifestyle application of that just seems so overwhelming to even get started with it. So you can see why they're so wildly popular, and they do bring, people are losing weight on them. But I've seen in my own family very recently, the effects of these drugs, and ER visits and passing out and severe diarrhea. Like, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I feel like you. Like, I think in 10 years, I wish we had a crystal ball to look at what's going to be happening with people who are on GLP-1. And like you said, like, if it's benefiting you and it's a short time period and you have a plan to get off and wean yourself off of these, then maybe it's in your best interest to try it for a while and get to the point where you can adapt better lifestyle, and better lifestyle applications. But you can see, when you look at what lowers GLP-1, you can see why we're in the predicament that we're in, because it's medication, it's ultra processed food, it's eating way too often, it's not eating enough protein, it's not eating enough fiber. And so you see why we're in this predicament. And now all of a sudden, like, instead of changing that, taking an injection to, like you said, like, people don't realize this is synthetic. It's not the natural hormone that our body is producing. And so I'm with you. I mean, I know a lot of the clients that I work with were on them. And in some circumstances, they've done well with them. They were able to successfully wean off. They increased their protein intake. They adjusted their lifestyle. They were training, like, so there's a spectrum. But I do hope, like we're not, like you said, looking back on this and like, what were we thinking? And then on the flip side of that, like, you can increase GLP-1 naturally. It's in your body. And that's what, you and I have focused on in the metabolic health space, like focusing your meals around protein, not eating all the time, only eating a couple times a day, getting good sleep, not drinking alcohol, not drinking ultra processed food, and increasing fiber intake. But a lot of times people don't want to do this. So
they don't want to do those things, and again, there's a lot of sleight of hand and semantics being played. Again, several times, you refer to the real name of the drugs are incretin mimetics, but nobody knows what that is. It's
yeah, I don't
GLP
even know what that is.
agonist. It's the same thing, but the emphasis has to be on the receptor agonist part. Everybody says GLP-1s, and again, as we have already established in this conversation, there is no GLP-1 in the GLP-1 receptor agonists. The only place from GLP-1 is from
The gut.
your stomach.
Yeah.
From and how do you turn around and get more of that? And for the longest time, I was kind of like racking my brain regarding this. And the reason why you and I are connected is through either Michelle Hearn or Shannon Davis. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Either or. Actually, we found a solution, and you're drinking it right now. You can actually entice your body into increasing the expression of GLP-1. And it's the field rate system from Unicity. And, I was kind of like just playing around with it. Like Shannon, I was introduced to this because of Shannon. She sent it to me. And again, I normally live a ketogenic lifestyle, so I'm very in tune with my body, what that feels like. And it's one of those things that, when I was kind of like playing around and like taking it, not very disciplined at taking it, like I could feel my body go, feeling in a way that if I was trying to go into a normal run of ketosis, it would take me about a week to get there.
Yes.
Where I'm getting there in like a few days, and it's like, wow, this is really interesting. Now that I've fully committed and have integrated this into my life, which hasn't been very long. It's literally 2 months now.
Yeah.
I've dropped 2% body fat. Okay. For the record, I'm not trying to cut weight.
No, me neither.
I am doing absolutely nothing other than drinking 2 of these a day to help me support my fast. Because I'm now able to intermittent fast. My wife, for the longest time, asked me not to intermittent fast because I get so angry. She would call me an a-hole because it was just, you just get really snappy. Nonetheless, yeah, I can normally make it to like 2 o'clock before it's like, wow, I really need to go and
Yeah.
eat at this time. If I go and I eat a high carb meal or a normal carb meal, I use the balanced product. But
Yep.
nonetheless, that's all I'm doing. I've dropped 8 pounds, 2% body fat without trying to. So,
It's
so people want to sit there and talk about like, oh, it's the whole convenience aspect. I don't want to go to the gym and everything like that. For the record, the only workouts that I really do are Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu 4 to 5, times a week. Get a great workout in that, but even with doing that before and introducing this, I'm getting significant biological change. And so irrespective of what you're trying to do in terms of metabolic health, well, I'm going to be going for another DEXA scan coming up here in, probably another, 2 months. I'm going to give myself a little bit more time to look at what my visceral fat looks like. I'm really into data, kind of a nerd.
Yeah.
I really want to see what my visceral fat looks like. My lipid panels normally are actually quite boring. So I'm really not expecting any type of change. But if somebody is into the whole aesthetics aspect, like my wife even commented, just like, man, you're really starting to like lean out. And I'm like, yeah, I noticed like my obliques are like coming out. And again, I'm not even trying
Yes, it's
to do
crazy.
anything. So this is the like the one of the very interesting things that I find about this product is simply because I am just so anti widespread use of GLP-1 receptor agonists, and I'm proud to be partnered with Unicity as a part of the Decoding podcast. Please, everybody, go and check out the Decoding Health. We got some great every week. We put out like 2 episodes, great information. But I'm really excited about being able to provide a alternative path to reclaiming their metabolic health. If you saw that Tufts University study that showed that 93% of all Americans are metabolically unhealthy, that is just...
Oh yeah, and it's true. And that was in like 2019, I think, or maybe it was 2021. Oh my gosh. So it's even worse, but I'm with you. So I've been on Feel Great for like 5 weeks and I wasn't expecting much because I'm generally pretty healthy. Like I have my rituals, I do the hydrogen water, I do the low carb. I only eat a couple times a day. And I was generally, like for being almost 50, it's like I pop out of bed, I feel good. And so I was like, same thing. I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel so dialed when I'm working now with drinking this. I lost 3 pounds. I'm like, I didn't even, wasn't expecting to lose weight because I'm a pretty small person as it is. And I slept better. Like I wear an Oura ring and my sleep scores were so improved within a week. I was like, what is in this?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a yerba mate, Unimate tea. The
Yep.
Unimate is a yerba mate tea with high amounts of chlorogenic acid, and the second part is the balance. So I'm kind of like you, like in a couple of months, I'm going to be doing my cholesterol panel. Not that I'm real worried about it. But I do have like my LDL is like 170 to 180, even though my triglycerides are low, my fasting insulin's low. I did have high morning blood sugars for a time when I was going through a really stressful time period. Those have now been regulated, but I am curious to see what it does for my LDL cholesterol, if it reduces that at all.
Well, and again, too, it's to quote Nick Norwitz, the N of one. If anybody knows who Nick Norwitz is, I had him on as
Yeah.
a guest on the show. Like, you got to just find out for yourself.
Yeah,
You know, it's
exactly.
because like in my world, everything's based around populations and population studies. Where you fit on that Gaussian distribution, that bell-shaped curve, I don't know. You got to find out for yourself.
I
I mean,
know. I
you know,
literally want to give this to everybody though. I'll be like,
yeah.
just try it for a month and see. Because if
Well,
it can do this amazing things for people who are already doing all the foundational things. And I think it's just like you talked about, the GLP-1s being a crutch. And which, that's kind of how I think of it. But this is something that naturally increases GLP-1 and no side effects, and you can do it long term without at a fraction of the cost. So
yeah, it's you just drink.
yes, and
And,
it
and
tastes
like,
good.
again, literally, doing this now for about 2 months religiously, like not even 2 months religiously as a part of my normal routine, and not skipping days, down 8 pounds, 2% body fat, just looking good, feeling, again, I'm 51 years old.
You're
And
51, I'm 49. It's we're
I
not
mean, my
anymore.
abs are coming out. It's like, my wife was just like, wow, your obliques are back. It's just like, yeah, thank you very much. I was waiting for you to
I
say so.
know. My husband is always very skeptical of the things that I do, and I'm like, sooner or later you're going to be on Feel Great with me. I know it.
Yeah,
It's just
absolutely. And again, too, just to go in and, plug the system, it's a 90-day money back guarantee
exactly.
from
So
the
you
company.
really
So you
can't
got
lose.
nothing,
Yeah. It's a
nothing to lose.
no-brainer. It is a
Yeah.
no-brainer because you can, if it doesn't work, I haven't heard of anyone like not having any positive changes with it. But if that's you for some reason, the company like stands behind its product and
Yeah, actually, if you want to learn more about the company, I had Sam Hughes, who's the vice president of America Sales and son of the owner. I had him on the podcast. Hear it straight from him. Like he says it on the show, and they will stand by it. No questions asked, money back guarantee. Just
well,
take
I'll
it
have
easy.
to try and get him on because I would love to dive deeper into the product. But is there anything else? I want to be very mindful of your time. I know we've gone over. Is there anything else you would love to tell us about what's on the horizon with things that you're working on or anything that I mean, metabolic health is a huge, vast subject,
Yeah.
and we just talked about a few little things today, but anything else you'd really love for people to hear before we close out?
Honestly, from my 9 to 5, I really can't disclose a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
regarding that. It's all proprietary.
Okay.
Again, I'm going to plug my podcast, The Decoding Health. Just go onto YouTube, Urban Kiernan. I'm the only one that's out there. Go and look it up. Please like, subscribe, follow, comment, go through all of it. We should be. We just broke 350,000 views.
Nice.
We're still beginning in terms of that growth, that growth trajectory and stuff. But nonetheless, it's like just really want to get the messages out there to everybody so they can be the best version of themselves. But I don't mean to be rude. I do need to
Yes.
bail.
Thank
Shana,
you so much for coming on. I'll do one more really quick plug. Unicity is hosting a metabolic health conference on November 8th. Urban will be there. I'll be there. Come meet us in person. It's going to be amazing. There's going to be so many.
and Ben Bickman's going to be
Oh,
speaking.
yes. My favorite.
He's going to be there. Some real high-profile speakers. So I'm actually really excited to be.
Yes, I am too. I'm looking forward to meeting you. Thanks so much for your time today. We'll have to have you back and talk more about
Anytime.
metabolic health because it's just, we learned so much today. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.